That is all the time it took for the clerk in Albemarle County, Virginia, to realize something was wrong. The boy stood barefoot on the courthouse steps in 1839, wrists still raw from rope, dirt ground into his knees. He could not have been more than 10. A slave child, property, illiterate by law. Yet when the clerk dropped a folded notice at his feet, the boy bent down, unfolded it carefully, and read it aloud. Perfectly. No stutter. No guessing. No memorization. He read the names of white men who owned him. He read the charges. He read the date. And when he finished, he looked up, not frightened, not proud, but exhausted, as if he had already read too many things no child should ever know. The courthouse went silent. Virginia law was clear. Teaching a slave to read was a crime. Teaching a slave child was worse. Teaching many was unthinkable. The boy was whipped anyway, not for reading, but for knowing. They asked him who taught him. He said only one sentence before he was dragged away. The man who writes in the dark. That phrase would appear again, and again, and again, across decades, counties, churches, orphanages, and graveyards. Always spoken by children. Always whispered. Always before they vanished. Virginia in the 1800s was not afraid of rebellion alone. It was afraid of memory. Plantations stretched like kingdoms. Churches stood like watchtowers. Orphanages absorbed the unwanted, the inconvenient, the mixed-blood children no one claimed. Every institution had rules, but one law overshadowed all others. Knowledge must never pass downward. A slave who could not read could not record abuse. A child who could not write could not testify. An orphan who could not read scripture could be shaped into anything. And yet, county records began to show anomalies. In 1841, a girl in Goochland County spelled her own name during a baptism registry. In 1844, twins in Orange County recited Psalm 23 from memory from a written Bible. In 1847, an orphan boy corrected a preacher's Latin. Each case was buried, labeled as mimicry, trickery, coincidence. But the punishments escalated. Children were sold south, moved between farms, transferred between church homes, separated deliberately, and still more appeared, always between the ages of 7 and 12, always exhausted, always knowing how to read things they were never shown. And when questioned, they all described the same man, not by name, by ritual. He came after prayers. He smelled like ink and smoke. He made us promise never to write our own names. No official record of him exists. That is the first terror. No census listing. No land deed. No church registry. No death notice. Yet for nearly 40 years, testimonies refer to one instructor moving invisibly through Virginia's institutional shadows. He was described as tall but bent, educated but broken, white, always white, because only a white man could move through plantations at night without question. He never stayed long. Children said he arrived during storms, or after funerals, or when a new pastor arrived. He never carried books openly, only folded scraps, charcoal, ash. He taught them letters by carving them into dirt floors. He taught reading by making them destroy the pages after. Most horrifying of all, he did not teach freedom. He taught record-keeping, dates, names, places, transactions. He taught children to remember what adults were desperate to forget. And he warned them, if you write your own name, they will kill you. Several children later testified that he made them memorize a sentence they were never allowed to write down. A sentence no adult ever recovered intact. Only fragments survived. When the count is finished, when the books are closed, when Virginia remembers. The first mass disappearance occurred in 1852. The Chowkley Hill Church Orphanage housed 32 children, half white, half enslaved or indentured. Within 6 weeks, 9 slave children vanished. No broken locks, no blood, no witnesses. But something else was found. Behind the pulpit, scratched faintly into the wood, were letters. Not words. Numbers. Dates. Tallies. Names shortened into initials. A secret archive carved where sermons once stood. The church burned 3 days later. Official cause: lightning. But locals whispered that the fire burned blue. When investigators arrived, they found something impossible beneath the ashes. Stone flooring, ink stains, and a single phrase written in a child's hand. He said Virginia would not forgive itself. The orphanage was erased from maps within the year. The children were never found. And for the first time, Lawmakers used a new phrase in private correspondence. The reader problem. They never asked why the children were being taught, only how to stop the man who taught them. By 1854, Virginia's churches stopped trusting their own books. Baptism registries were rewritten twice. Marriage ledgers were locked behind iron clasps. Death records began using symbols instead of names. Dots, slashes, crosses, marks only clergy understood. This was not faith. It was containment. Because somewhere, someone was still counting. Pastors noticed missing lines in sermons they swore they had written. Numbers scratched into confession booths. A child once recited a burial record that had never been spoken aloud. And always, when the adults demanded answers, the children said the same thing. He said you would lie. Church councils met in basements. They created what were called counter records, false ledgers meant to confuse anyone trying to reconstruct the truth. Births were delayed. Deaths were moved. Children were renamed. The Civil War disrupted everything, except the reader. While men died openly, children continued disappearing quietly. Union soldiers reported strange encounters, abandoned farms with lessons etched into tables. Churches where hymn numbers matched plantation transaction codes. A black child once handed a Union officer a note containing troop movements written in flawless cursive. When asked who taught him, the boy said, "The man who doesn't belong to any side." After emancipation, officials assumed the phenomenon would end. It did not. Freed children still appeared knowing how to read records no one showed them. Orphans still corrected clerks. Young girls knew the names of men who denied owning them. Freedom did not erase the ledger. It expanded it. In 1872, a dying schoolteacher in Louisa County left a confession. She admitted that decades earlier, a man had visited her class at night. He asked for nothing, only silence. He showed the children how to read county records upside down, how to remember without writing, how to pass knowledge through rhyme. Before leaving, he warned her, "When they think the counting is over, that's when the last page begins." She burned the confession after copying one line. That line survives in a private family Bible. Virginia will find the children again. By the 1880s, Virginia believed the problem had aged out. The children who once whispered names were grown or dead. Slavery was abolished. Records modernized. Ink standardized. Education slowly permitted. And yet, something far worse emerged. Children who had never met the man began knowing what he taught. A gravedigger in Hanover County reported a boy reciting burial numbers before coffins were lowered. A girl in a freedmen's school corrected a death certificate dated 30 years before her birth. An orphan claimed she learned to read from voices under the church. Adults dismissed it as folklore, until bones began to move. In 1893, a 12-year-old girl named Ruth Caldwell collapsed during a history recitation. Before losing consciousness, she spoke a sentence no one had heard completed before. "When the count is finished, the book will read itself." She died that night. Her autopsy revealed no disease. But under her fingernails, examiners found ink residue, homemade, ash-based, identical to formulas used before the war. Her room contained no paper, only tally marks carved into bed slats. Authorities sealed the house. The marks were sanded away, but photographs survived. They matched symbols found decades earlier beneath Chalkley Hill. The same hand, different child. In 1901, Virginia launched a quiet initiative. Not public, not legislative. Clerks were instructed to normalize historical records, align dates, remove anomalies, simplify ownership chains. Anything unclear was corrected. This was not correction. It was surgery. But the more records they altered, the more children appeared who noticed. A boy in Roanoke identified 3 falsified death entries by smell alone. He said the paper didn't rot correctly. A girl in Norfolk refused to learn modern script, insisting the old forms breathed better. When questioned, both described the same figure. Older now, thinner, still unnamed. He said you can't burn what's already been memorized. In 1917, an orphanage in Culpeper County was investigated after staff reported that children were teaching each other to read without instruction. No books, no chalk, no visible method. Yet literacy spread. Children traced letters on each other's backs, spoke dates in rhythm, learned names through song patterns no adult recognized. When the state intervened, inspectors found something terrifying. The children had reconstructed a complete slave ledger from memory alone. Names long erased. Sales unrecorded. Deaths falsified. At the end of the ledger was a blank page. Every child refused to fill it. They said, "That page is for him." The orphanage closed within the year. The building still stands. Locals say its windows light up when records are amended. In 1928, a photograph surfaced in a Richmond archive. It showed a group of children, black and white, standing in a cemetery. Behind them stood a man. His face was blurred, as if the camera itself refused him clarity. Experts dated the photograph across 3 decades simultaneously. The children aged differently. The man did not. On the back, written in an unfamiliar hand, "Still counting." The photograph was removed from circulation, but copies had already been made, and children, once again, began to read without being taught. By the 1930s, Virginia stopped asking who the man was. They began asking what he was. Archivists noticed something impossible. References to the reader predated his earliest sightings. Marginal notes in colonial records. Sermon drafts from the 1700s mentioning the one who keeps count. Plantation ledgers with blank spaces labeled reserved. The state had not created him. It had inherited him. A historian at the University of Virginia proposed a theory in a paper that was never published, that the reader was not a person, but a role, passed down, assumed, or awakened when records reached a certain density of lies. The paper ended with one line, written in different ink. Every system that erases must eventually appoint a witness. The historian resigned 2 weeks later. Midwives began reporting it first. Children born during storms who reacted to written words before speech. Infants who calmed when pages were turned upside down. Toddlers who traced letters in dust without instruction. Doctors dismissed it. In 1942, the state created its last solution. A centralized archive. Climate-controlled. Guarded. Standardized. All historical records moved into one place. The idea was control. The effect was catastrophe. Children across Virginia began having the same dream. A room with no windows. Shelves stacked to the ceiling. A man turning pages that bled numbers. When the archive opened, its first night guard reported hearing pages turning without hands. The second night guard quit. The third vanished. In the archive's basement, inspectors found a message scratched into concrete. "You brought the book together. Thank you." Only once. In 1949, during a power outage, a janitor encountered him in the archive. The man was old. Not aged, accumulated. His clothes were stitched from different eras. His fingers were stained permanently black. He did not threaten. He did not flee. He only said, "I was never teaching them to read." The janitor asked what he was doing. The man answered, "I was teaching the truth how to survive." When the lights returned, the man was gone. But a ledger lay open on the floor. Its last page was no longer blank. The final entry did not name the man. It named the state. Dates. Transactions. Punishments. Lies. At the bottom, written in a hand both ancient and childlike. Count complete. No fires followed. No disappearances. Only silence. Children stopped whispering names. Records stabilized. Virginia slept easier. Because the ledger worked. Once truth was recorded, it no longer needed witnesses. The reader vanished, not destroyed, but relieved. The institution survived because they were finally seen. And history moved forward, slightly heavier, slightly truer. In the archive today, there is a rule no one explains. Children are not allowed inside. Not because they might damage the records, but because sometimes, when a child stands near the shelves, a book falls open by itself. And the child knows exactly where to look. After 1950, Virginia changed its language. Not publicly, not in law, but in tone. Archivists stopped calling records property histories and began calling them human files. Churches revised sermons about obedience. Schools taught history slower, heavier, as if afraid to rush past something fragile. No one credited the change. No one mentioned the ledger. But elders noticed something unsettling. Progress felt less like victory and more like penance. As though the state had finally realized it was not being punished, but remembered. In 1956, a boy on a school trip to Richmond's archives raised his hand. He did not ask about slavery. He did not ask about war. He asked, "Why do the older books feel warmer?" The teacher laughed. The archivist did not. Because warmth was something staff had quietly reported for years. Certain shelves radiated heat despite climate control. Pages felt alive. Ink seemed darker there, denser, as if it had absorbed something. The boy was removed from the tour early. That night, he wrote dates in his sleep. His parents found numbers carved into his desk. They burned the desk. The numbers appeared again, on the wall. The man did not leave empty-handed. This is the part no institution ever admitted. When the ledger closed, certain memories went with it. People forgot specific names, exact locations. Certain faces faded from photographs. Entire lineages became hazy, not erased, but unreachable. This was the price. Truth recorded no longer needed to be carried by the living. The burden lifted, but something else filled the space. A quiet fear of forgetting again. Every generation rewrites something, shortens a paragraph, softens a phrase, omits a cause. And every time that happens, the same pattern begins to reappear. Children who ask questions too precisely. Students who notice inconsistencies too early. Young voices who recognize lies before learning politics. They are not haunted. They are sensitive to imbalance. Because the reader was never a man. He was a function. Records still accumulate. Systems still erase. Institutions still simplify suffering into acceptable language. And somewhere between truth and convenience, the count begins again. The difference now? The reader no longer needs to walk. The work spreads. Through memory. Through pattern recognition. Through children who refuse to forget what they were never taught. People believe the story is about literacy. It is not. It is about witness. Reading was only the tool. Writing was only the method. The real lesson was this. If you deny truth long enough, truth will learn to speak without permission. Because you are part of the system now. You consume records. You repeat narratives. You choose which histories feel comfortable. And somewhere inside that choice, the count adjusts. This story was never meant to scare you. It was meant to locate you. Not letters. Not numbers. But restraint. They were taught to wait. To let lies grow heavy enough to collapse. To understand that truth does not need to chase power. It only needs to outlast it. The sentence the children were forbidden to finish was not a curse. It was a promise. Recovered only once, in a margin no one thought to erase. When the count is finished, the book will no longer belong to those who wrote it. There is no monster, no chase, no fire, only shelves, pages, and the knowledge that history is watching who handles it. Because if the balance tips again, the children will notice first, and the reader will not need to return.